5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Puck short. Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new episode of the One Bucket Short podcast, episode 96. My guest this week is a national hockey writer and host of the Puck Pursuit podcast On The Score. Please welcome to the show, John Matisz. John, hi, how are you?
Good, thanks for having me on, Rob.
Hey, Duff, thanks for joining me. We're kind of in that little bit of a lull post All-Star game. Some teams are still off on their All-Star breaks, and obviously we're off before the All-Star games, sorry. So I thought this was a good opportunity for you to have a look at the playoff picture and who we think will be in. Some are pretty obvious, I think. Tampa Bay, for example. And who might miss out, I think, particularly in the West. The wildcard race is pretty interesting. So I'll start with the East, because I mentioned the Lightning off the hop there. And the Atlantic Division, to me, seems... I don't want to say locked in. That's probably the wrong term to use. But the Lightning are on pace for a historical season in the cap era. Toronto seem pretty good right now. I think they're pretty safe, especially now they've had a Jake Muzzin. Montreal, Boston too. I just feel like they're playing well enough to make it. I mean, what do you make of the Atlantic Division? And have Buffalo missed their chance, perhaps?
They might have. There's something about Buffalo where it seemed too good to be true at the beginning of the season. I think that the expectations were, well, not the expectations, but the ability to blow last year out of the water. The bar was really low, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. And they've already accomplished that. Like it's a win in Buffalo whether they make the playoffs or not. So, Sabres fans shouldn't be too upset if they don't make it. And my whole thinking around that is they're just not even close to being a complete team at this point. So, they have some nice top-end talent between Jack Eichel, Jeff Skinner, Rasmus Dahlin, and some other pieces on there, like Lawrence Pilot's been a nice story. Rasmus Ristolainen is playing minutes that are probably more appropriate for his skill set. Sam Reinhart's had a pretty good year. Carter Hutton also had a confidence building year. So, like, Buffalo on the up and up, but I wouldn't be surprised if they made it. Like, it's not like they're going to sputter off and finish last in the conference like they usually do. But when you look at the teams that are in front of them, I think that Montreal has given themselves a nice cushion here, that they can falter off a little bit. Yeah. And then from there, you have Boston, obviously, and you have, Toronto that's not going to fall off by any means, at least unless it happens. So the Atlantic, as you mentioned, Tampa's the team to beat across the board, and their stake at the top of the Atlantic isn't in jeopardy whatsoever. So I think from there, if I were a betting man, I'd go Toronto second, Boston third, and then they could maybe switch there. And then I do think that Montreal has put themselves in a pretty good position to snag a wild card.
Yeah, just for people who so understand, we're speaking on this Thursday night. Toronto 62 points, Montreal 61, Boston 60, and then Buffalo just outside at the moment on 56 points. Columbus in the second wildcard spot with 59. The Metro feels a little bit more difficult to predict, just in terms maybe of who will finish where, who will be the top three. At the moment, the Islanders leading the division. They've got a 3-point advantage on Pittsburgh and Washington, both on 60 points. As we mentioned, the Blue Jackets, they're on 59 though. And it's kind of Carolina then hanging around on 54 points. Nobody really knows what to make of the Hurricanes because they've had these great shot metrics, maybe haven't got the goaltending at times, maybe haven't got the scoring at times. I mean, can the Hurricanes make a late charge? The Blue Jackets trade options, the Panarin and Bobrovsky keep kind of lingering in the background there. How do you think the Metro shakes out?
Yeah, the Metro's a bit of a mess right now. Just like a lot of good teams, a lot of teams playing well, but I don't know if what we're seeing on our pages right now with the standings is going to hold up, because the New York Islanders, I've come around them. At first I thought it was a bit of a mirage. I thought that what they were doing was unsustainable, and I don't think that they're probably as good as their record, but I still think that they're a playoff team, and that's saying a lot when last year they couldn't save a buck to save their lives, and then they lose John Tavares, and there was just everything working against them. So the fact that they're in this position, which is the top of the Metro right now, is phenomenal. I think they'll come back down to earth a little bit, but still make the playoffs and maybe get that 3 seed in the Metro, maybe the 2 seed, who knows? And then from there, I think that obviously Columbus is the wild card here, like, not the actual wild card, but the wild card team, like what's going to happen with them, because you mentioned Artemi Panarin, a legitimate star in the National Hockey League, on the trade block, and not necessarily by Columbus's own volition. They would prefer to keep him. They would prefer to re-sign him, but he's told the team he's not open to talking about an extension during the season. And let's face it, probably if he's saying that he probably wants to leave via free agency. So they have it's a very tough situation for Jarmo Kekalainen, especially when you throw in that their starting goalie and one of the best goalies in the entire league is also thinking about leaving and probably will. So Columbus, a lot going on there, and they've weathered the storm of speculation throughout the year. So that you got to give them credit for that and holding on to a playoff spot through 49 games. I think that alone is impressive. And I think what we're forgetting too when we talk about Columbus is that, let's just say they lose Panarin and they lose Bobrovsky for nothing. I don't think that we're looking at a team that needs to, undergo major construction, needs to really, just go in the tank. Like they have, between Pierre-Luc Dubois, Zach Werenski, Seth Jones, a couple other pieces like Cam Atkinson. They have pieces. Mind you, they'd be losing probably 2 of their, 3 best players. I think that the turnaround wouldn't be as drastic or dramatic or as long as many people think, at least on paper. So anyways, Columbus long term, there's questions there, and that relates to the trade deadline. After Columbus, I think Carolina is the team where, also in relation to the trade deadline, they've got to choose if they're going to sell or buy, or maybe they do both. What do they, trade out Michael Ferland and maybe a defenseman, but bring in, a really high-end top 6 forward that can push the puck in the net, which they need to a great extent. Or, do they just naturally start scoring more goals because of their metrics, their underlying numbers being so high for so long through 50 games, and them not seeing the result of that? It's difficult to say, because we talk about the Carolina Hurricanes in this way every single year. Even though they have a new coach and some new players, it's still not working. There's something going on there. We were talking about something being in the water last week in Edmonton, and maybe there's something in the water in Carolina. So if I were, to end on the same note as I did with the Atlantic, if I were a betting man, I'd go Pittsburgh, Washington, New York, kind of how it's laid out right now in the Metro, but just in a different order. And then the last card, just, I don't know, I'd say Carolina, because I can see Columbus going sideways pretty quickly, at least in terms of points in the standings, if Panarin and Bobrovsky or one of them is dealt.
I mean, if we sit ourselves in Jarmo Kekalainen's shoes for a moment, what do you do with Panarin and Bobrovsky? Because the greatest return would probably come by trading them before the trade deadline. There is the option, of course, to then trade their rights in the summer, which would probably still garner a reasonable return from a team, especially if they thought that they could sign either of the pair, that they'd be willing to give something reasonable up because they know they're then going to get a very good player joining their team. How would you play it? What would you do if you were in Jarmo Kekalainen's shoes?
Well, first of all, I don't envy the guy. Like, this is not his fault. I don't think the team's done anything wrong. I think that it's more or less, it seems a little fishy because it's 2 guys and it's 2 Russians happening at the same time. But I think it's more or less out of their control, and just 2 guys that happen to be up at the same time that happen to not want to stay in Columbus. So that's my first statement in regards to Kekalainen. But also, if I were him, I would stay the course, keep these guys under team control, and let them walk if they want to walk. And I would normally suggest that. Let's say if it's, I don't know, the Florida Panthers under this situation, the Toronto Maple Leafs, whoever, pick another team. The reason why it's different in Columbus is that the fan base has just been starved for any kind of playoff success over the years, and the difference between trading them at the deadline and letting them go, I don't like. There's obviously going to be a return there, and there's going to be a decent package, but I also don't think it's not like it's a year out of free agency where the team can really get a ton out of this player. Like Panarin might go to a team that can't sign him, and he's going to go to free agency and leave, so he's just a rental. So how much do you really get from rentals? And if you compare that side by side to possibly winning a series in the first round, which very capable team, I think that's possible. I mean, maybe not where they are now against the Tampa Bay Lightning, but if mind you, we're talking about this when there's 32 games left in the season, but if they happen to play the New York Islanders, I mean, I'm taking the Columbus over the Islanders in the 7 games. So, given the history of that team and the fact that it's not like they're a one-man show where if they don't have Panarin, they're useless. I think that you the guy, even though it seems counterintuitive to normal thinking, to get rid of him if he doesn't want to be around and cut your losses and move forward. I just think it's such a different situation in Columbus where the fan base is great. And they've had flashes of brilliance in the regular season, the odd, moment in those, but nothing other than that. So you got to give them a bone. And I think that most fans would understand, given that at the end of the day, this isn't the team's, problem. It isn't they bring it upon themselves. So.
Yeah, no, I agree totally with that. I think holding on to them and treating them almost as like their own playoff rentals makes sense because, as you alluded to, how many times have the Blue Jackets been able to say, we've got a team capable of winning maybe even a couple of rounds, depending on how things shake out? You said, they'd have a fair shot against the Islanders as well as the Islanders are doing right now. And then they'd have a fair share against the Capitals and the Penguins. So all of a sudden they're maybe a conference final team, which would be clearly the best result they've ever had because they've never won a playoff round. So, I think the logic is, well, go for it. Now we have the chance because, as you said, in a market which has supported them pretty well, despite some middling results, shall we say, to be polite, I think they almost owe it to themselves as much as the fan base to give it a go while they've got these two guys, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's just a unique situation. And I just, like, the way you put it is perfect. It's like their own mentals, right? So if your team's already decent and you think if you think in sort of a different mindset and say, oh, we just acquired Panarin, we just acquired Bobrovsky, and come the off season after we won a couple of rounds, maybe they want to stay. It's kind of a sell job, even though it sounds like both players want to leave. Like maybe take one last chance, and people change their minds, right? So I don't know. I think we're on the same page here, where if you keep them, you have a greater chance of pleasing your fans and of not having a terrible cost associated with it.
Yeah, for sure. Let's swing west, where things are interesting in the wildcard race, as we said off the top. I think the Pacific top three, Calgary, San Jose, and the Vegas Golden Knights are pretty much locked in. The Knights and the Sharks may swap position, but I think those three are pretty much safe the way they've played. Likewise, in the Central, I'd say the Jets and the Predators are safe. Again, they may swap position with the 1-2 spot in the Central there, but outside of that, it is wide open. The Wild have got the third spot in the Central right now on 55 points. Dallas, wildcard spot, 54. The Avs, who've kind of collapsed a little bit, they're 3-7-0 in their last 10, but they're hanging in there because nobody's running with this. I mean, how do you see this wildcard race shaken out? Can the Wild hold on? Do Dallas, who are playing well lately, do they hop in there? Or how's this actually going to pan out?
Good question. I don't have. The thing is, I'd like to say, Vancouver or Anaheim or Arizona or St. Louis or Edmonton, like all these teams that are within 3 points of the second wild card. I'd like to say one of those teams is going to grab hold of the last 30 games and rocket up the standings. But none of those teams really strike confidence in me. Like, Anaheim particularly, I'm surprised they're not further down the standings after that horrendous that they won on. Vancouver, I just think that they're just not ripe yet. I mean, maybe they make the playoffs, and that would be a great story. But I look at that roster, and I don't see a playoff team. So the way that the playoffs are set up now, as anticlimactic as it is, it seems like that's probably how it's going to pan out, although given what's happened in Dallas over the course of the season, I wonder about what happens there, and if things go off the rails a little bit, because they've been lucky that no one's come in and swooped in. And I guess you could say the same thing for Colorado.
Yeah, for sure.
But based on the clientele, the player and coach relationship, the manager and coach relationship, and players, just does seem a bit of a toxic situation. Colorado is kind of all fun games at this point. So I just don't know. Yes, St. Louis would be the one sort of underdog, or course, I guess we put it, to get into the playoffs, just because they have a good team. They actually have a very good team on paper, but it's taken them so long to get their act together that now they might be a little too far behind the 8 ball. But when I look at the 5 teams, which sounds crazy, the 5 teams that are out of the playoffs right now that have an easy, I don't want to say easy chance to get in, but it's not it's plausible that all these guys could jump in there. I think St. Louis probably jumps off the page just based on expectations coming into the season. Yeah. I thought that they would be in sort of they were the top 10 team, and they've been a disaster. But I don't know, there's 30 games left. I guess that's enough to string together a pretty nice, what is that, last third of the season or so.
Yeah, it's crazy. St. Louis is the perfect example of the insanity of the situation. A couple of months ago, they were talking about blowing up the core, trading Pietrangelo, maybe Tarasenko. O'Reilly was pretty much the only guy who was any kind of safe because he was a recent acquisition, and now they're 2 wins from a playoff spot, and they've got a game in hand. They've only played the 49 games. Everyone else has played at least 50. So, for whatever that's worth, they might have a slight advantage there that they've got that one extra game, and they've been playing well of late. 6-3-1 the last 10. You look at the teams immediately above them. The Coyotes, they've lost their last game. Ducks lost their last 2. And as you said, they've been absolutely brutal. It's only by virtue of John Gibson, really, that they've hung around. Mm-hmm. And then the West has been so rubbish around them that they've managed to maintain their 1 win from a spot in the playoffs. And I mean, even Edmonton, for all the chaos that's gone on there with second Chiarelli and the roster composition, they're still, again, 2 wins from a playoff spot potentially. And it's one of those situations, normally you'd say, oh, there's no way they're leapfrogging 5 teams. But it's been such a hot mess. You could see that happening by the end of next week.
Yeah, well, the funny thing about this kind of ludicrous, crazy situation going on in the West is that, even if you include Dallas and Colorado, that's 7 teams that I don't have a lot of faith in, any of them. In Colorado, yeah, to an extent, but I could see it continuing down this road where the majority of these 7 teams keep going, on a downhill slide, and then the wildcard teams in the West have, I don't know, 80, 85 points versus the usual 95. That's kind of the point that we're at. If you look across to the wildcard in the East, those 2 teams have about 8 more points than what's happening in the West. That's a pretty big difference at this point in the season.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't remember a time when it's been like this. I mean, I'm sure it has, but nothing comes to mind where there's a lot of teams at the bottom and no one's really stepping up. And maybe, after the All-Star break, after bye weeks, we see a team come back refreshed, come back, all guns a-blazing, so to speak, and we see just someone take hold of one of those wild cards and not let go. So, I mean, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me in one breath that this continues, this weird, mediocre 7-team section here. But it also wouldn't surprise me in another breath if, I don't know, Colorado just says screw it and they rattle off, 8 wins in the 10 games, and it's not even a question if they make it. They're pretty much guaranteed.
I mean, what effect do you think this might have on the trade deadline? Because we've kind of got half a dozen teams in the East, and then only really the Blackhawks and the Kings in the West who are, should we say, out of it. I mean, even then, the Blackhawks and the Kings maybe aren't that far out in the West right now. But, they're likely to be sellers. As I said, half a dozen teams in the East. I mean, Detroit, we kind of knew would be a seller. Senators probably as well. New Jersey, Philadelphia, and Florida aren't really where they want to be, but they may consider selling. And the Rangers, I was really sure. I guess there'll be a seller now with Hayes and Zuccarello. I mean, having this really weird wildcard race in the West, does that increase the chances of seeing a busier trade deadline period, do you think?
I mean, it's kind of hard. It's kind of handicap, right? Well, for one, I would say the things are 1,000% selling. The Jake Muzzin acquisition the other day by the Toronto Maple Leafs. I was on the conference call with Rob Blake, and he was just beside himself, hey, we're selling, kind of just a sense that that there isn't sort of light at the end of the tunnel of the season. They're last in the West, and it's time to sell, and anyone who thinks otherwise is out to lunch, kind of thing. So, and probably fall in that same category, although they probably have a quicker turnaround in terms of next season and moving up the standing. Kings here. I mean, the Oilers, they're probably going to be buyers because of what's been coming out of that month.
Right.
Rumors and the fact that they're probably higher on their team than they should be, or that they want to sell tickets for next year. So they're trying to just promote being at least a decent team. Yeah. But yeah, I would say the East. The East is where the sellers are. The Flyers, they're gonna. I don't know how deep they're gonna cut, but they're gonna cut. The Red Wings, the Senators, the Devils don't have much to trade, to be honest. They have a lot of just random players, and Taylor Hall and Sammy Vatanen, and just the roster's kind of ho-hum. And then the Rangers, we're waiting for them to make these big moves that they promised. What was it, last February? I think it's coming up on a year, where they came out to their fans and said, we're rebuilding. Well, they've let go of a couple guys, but they still have, some serious pieces there. So a guy like Kevin Hayes, a guy like Matt Zuccarello, they're just gone. You would assume so, given the messaging coming out of New York and the utility of those players.
Yeah, and you mentioned the Raiders. Kreider's such an interesting piece because they could easily keep hold of him and he could be part of a rebuild. He's still young enough, but equally he could bring some really nice pieces back because, he's a talented guy. He can score. He's got that physical edge to him. I mean, he's one of the more intriguing pieces, I think, heading towards that trade deadline.
No, I agree. I think he's right up there on the borderline in terms of there's some players even Dougie Hamilton in Carolina where you're going. I mean, if Carolina trades him, cool. If you want to do that, go ahead. But you're giving away a really nice player, and what are you getting back in return? I don't understand why Dougie Hamilton's always in the walk. I would want him on my team every day of the week. And Chris Kreider kind of falls in the same category, although. He's 27. He's not, he's not super young. I think he's a really good player, and I get that on my team. But if you're the Rangers, I think it's okay to dangle him out there and see what kind of calls you get on him. I don't know if he's a cornerstone in the sense that he's going to make a big impact on any team, challenging for Cup or middling. So he's a very good support player. Don't get me wrong. They shouldn't be too attached to Chris Kreider.
You mentioned the Devils as well. Looking at the roster, as you said, it's not an all-star roster by any stretch. Carl Palmieri, Taylor Hall, Nico Hischier are kind of the obvious names. They've got some okay pieces on the back end. But there's also some guys there you could see being moved for third-round picks, maybe second-round picks, depending on who's coming in. Brian Boyle, Marcus Johansson. Arthur Staple mentioned them on last week's podcast as possible targets for the New York Islanders just because of their contract situations, what they might bring to the team. But guys like Jesper Bratt maybe could also attract some interest. it's a strange team because, as you said, it doesn't wow you, but there are pieces there Ray Shero could consider moving, I think, to get some futures or some more picks.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. And the thing with Ray Shero is, that I really enjoyed about what he did this offseason is that he didn't do much. Like, he could have taken last year and went, oh, wow, we're a playoff team. We got MVP. Now let's press fast forward, sign these free agents, and bolster our lineup. And he didn't really do that. So, like, if I'm a Devils fan, even though in the moment you're like, come on, let's see some action here. I think that their books look really good right now. And, you know, at the end of the day, they need to somehow convince Taylor Hall to sign a long-term deal there. And, I mean, you got to sell him on something. I don't know if that ends up being, oh, we have a bunch of picks coming up, or we have Nico Hischier and Sammy Vatanen, Damon Severson. I don't know if Will Butcher. I don't know if those type of names will keep him there. But as you said, if we're thinking about short term, I think that they at least need to consider bidding farewell to guys like Boyle, he's not overpaid by any means, but at 2.55, there's at least probably, you know, for most teams that are in a cap crunch, that's not ideal. You know, you'd like him probably at $1 million. Because he's on a contending team, he's probably going to play on your fourth line or maybe on your third line. You make a good point. Whenever I think of New Jersey, I just think of like four legit like guys in your top six or on your top four, and then the rest are just useful players, but the name value just isn't there. So.
And we've looked at the kind of the playoff situation, who might make the cut. As we said, there are some teams who seem pretty well set to make it. We mentioned the Lightning, we mentioned the Predators, the Jets, and the Maple Leafs. I mean, looking a little bit further ahead to the Stanley Cup final, I mean, who do you think has the best chance to emerge as a serious cup contender or winner, depending on how you want to look at the question this year?
Well, I think the East is, the whole cup conversation starts and ends with Bay Lightning. I just think they're head and shoulders better than the rest of the league.
Yeah.
Like, you know, they've done absolutely nothing throughout the season to elicit any other reaction than you're the cup favorite. So that's the East, with number two probably being, that's kind of tough. I don't even know. Probably Toronto or Pittsburgh or Washington. I've soured, but Boston hasn't totally gotten their act together, so maybe them. But there's the Tampa tier, and then there's probably 3 or 4 teams that are grouped together there. And then in the West, in terms of the confidence level and who I think is going to be maybe in the final, I think I probably have the Jets and the Sharks almost neck and neck, and then in the second tier, probably the Predators and the Flames. I just can't give too much credit just because of goaltending. I don't know if David Rich is a Stanley Cup winning goaltender, and that's no discredit to what he's done, but just we haven't seen enough of him, and he could end up proving everyone wrong. But as you know, Rob, goalies just, you want to see large samples before you hitch your wagon to them, right? So their backup goaltending with Mike Smith is just so it's just not dependable that you're just, it's easy to just go, okay, let's pump the brakes on the Flames, even though when you look at the standings, they're having a hell of a year. And the reason why the Sharks up with the Jets is just, we haven't seen the best from either of those teams. I think that the Sharks in particular took them a little while to get used to Erik Karlsson, and one of the big shots on the back end, and it's just come around almost full circle. I'd say their goaltending is like a 3, but not to the extent as Calgary. So, if you're holding a gun to my head, I'd say Sharks and the Lightning.
Yeah, I mean the thing with Rittich is it's not just maybe the small sample, though it is to a point as well. It's more that come playoff time, that's when teams start to write the book on goaltenders, especially. They look at their tendencies. If you've got to play a potentially a 7-game series, it pays to do your homework. So that's when they'll start to look and say, okay, well, look, let's assume it's Colorado for the sake of argument, because the standings would line up like that right now. The Avs will look, and Jared Bednar will look and say, right, well, look, seen these guys a couple of times this year. And, we haven't really done too much because they're not in our division. But now let's actually have a look. Let's see what this guy does actually do or can actually do or where the holes are. And that's when the big test comes. Some guys pass it with flying colours. Others not so much. or it takes them a couple of years. So,
And just, you make a great point, just to piggyback on that and use the Toronto example. So they acquired Jake Muzzin. This move, didn't give up a ton. I thought it was pretty smart, especially the timing. But when you think about the playoffs and game planning, all of a sudden, someone, between him and Morgan Ross, one of them has to play on the right side. Well, that's doable in the regular season. That's okay in the regular season. But when you get game planned, let's say by the Montreal Canadiens, who if the playoffs start today, they get matched up against. Brendan Gallagher can exploit that on the forecheck easily. Let's say Muzzin's on the right side. Gallagher can just attack Muzzin whenever he's trying to break the puck out or go around the back of the net. And there's a reason why it's such a bugaboo in the NHL, this whole left side, right side, right-handed defensemen are so valuable because it's a difficult thing to do, and you can get away with it in the regular season, but when it's game planning season, aka the playoffs, all bets are off, and all of a sudden Cousins getting, he lost those few inches that he had, or that one extra step to make the play handing on the right side. So I just thought you made a good point there. I thought there was a bit related to Toronto, and I think that's something that I think we're getting in terms of that Muzzin deal, is that it all looks great on paper, but we'll see when the game planning begins.
All right, I think on that terrible note for Maple Leafs fans, we'll have to wrap things up. John, is there anything you want to promote, pimp out, tease? Where can people find you, etc., etc.?
Sure. So on Twitter, I'm MATISZJOHN. That's Matisz John. And then my personal podcast is Puck Pursuit. So you can find that on iTunes. You can find that on SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, pretty much wherever people get podcasts. So that's Puck Pursuit. Just type it in the search field and you'll find it. So those are probably the two best ways to get a hold of my content. The written stuff through my Twitter account, and then Puck Pursuit. If you subscribe there, you're good to go.
Awesome. John, thank you very much for your time today.
No problem, Rob. Thank you.